The night air outside the Vanderbilt Hotel was cool, crisp, and heavy with unspoken tension. Inside, the grand ballroom shimmered with golden light, filled with the laughter and chatter of the city's elite. Emily Carter stood by the champagne bar, her heart pounding beneath her elegant navy gown. For the first time in months, all eyes were on her, but not for pity. She could feel every glance, every whispered speculation. Yet standing beside Alexander Knight, the famously untouchable CEO of Knight Industries, she finally didn't care what they thought. His presence was like armor, calm, confident, untouchable, and it made her feel powerful. But deep down, she knew this moment was built on borrowed courage. As the orchestra played softly in the background, Emily tried to focus on breathing. Across the room, her ex Ryan stood beside his new wife, smiling too widely for the cameras. The sight twisted something inside her, but Alexander's voice broke through her thoughts. "You're doing fine," he murmured, his tone low and reassuring. "Just keep smiling. You're winning this evening already." She turned to look at him, her lips trembling into a faint smile. "Do you do this often?" she whispered. "Play knight in shining armor for strangers?" Alexander chuckled quietly, his eyes glinting under the chandelier. "Not for strangers," he said. "Just for people who ask boldly enough." Emily laughed softly, relaxing for the first time that evening. "You think I'm bold?" she asked. "I think," he said, tilting his head, "you're either fearless or completely insane. I haven't decided yet." She took a sip of her drink, trying to hide her grin. "Maybe both." Their banter drew glances from nearby guests, many of whom whispered behind perfectly polished smiles. The combination of the reclusive billionaire and the unknown woman from nowhere was irresistible gossip material. Every pair of eyes in the room seemed to follow their every move. Across the hall, Ryan couldn't take his eyes off Emily. His bride, Jenna, tried to laugh it off, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her. "She brought Alexander Knight," she hissed under her breath. "Why would he even be here?" Ryan's fake smile never faltered, but his voice was tight. "Maybe it's just coincidence," he said, though even he didn't believe that. From the corner of her eye, Emily saw the discomfort spread, and that was enough. She leaned closer to Alexander. "They're watching," she whispered. He didn't even glance their way. "Good," he said simply. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." When the orchestra switched to a slower tune, Alexander rose gracefully and extended his hand toward her. "Dance with me," he said. The words sent a shiver through her. She hesitated just for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, warmth surged through her chest. The ballroom seemed to fall silent as they stepped onto the floor. Alexander's hand rested lightly at her waist, guiding her with an effortless rhythm. Emily felt the world fade away. No ex, no whispers, no cameras. Just the two of them moving in perfect harmony beneath the glittering chandeliers. As they danced, Emily found herself looking up into his eyes. There was something about him, something steady and unreadable, that made her feel seen. "You're really good at this," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I don't believe in doing anything halfway." She wanted to reply, but words failed her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't pretending. Maybe he wasn't either. The music swelled, and he pulled her a little closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You deserve better than to be defined by the past," he said quietly. "Remember that." Her throat tightened. Nobody had ever said something like that to her, especially not someone like him. Before she could answer, the song ended, and the applause around them snapped her back to reality. She stepped away, suddenly aware of how real it had felt. "Thank you," she whispered. "For tonight," Alexander nodded. "It's not over yet," he said, his tone almost teasing. "We still have dessert." She smiled despite herself. "You really don't do fake halfway, do you?" "I told you," he said, his voice low. "If we're going to give them a story, we give them a good one." Later that evening, as they sat together at the long table decorated with roses and candles, Emily caught herself laughing, genuinely laughing, at one of his dry remarks. The guests around them stared, pretending not to listen, but failing miserably. Ryan watched from across the room, his jaw clenched tight. Jenna tried to distract him, but his focus never wavered. Emily noticed, and for the first time, she didn't feel broken or bitter. She just felt free. "You're enjoying this far too much," Alexander said, his tone carrying a hint of amusement. "Maybe," she admitted, "but you have to admit, it's fun watching them squirm." He smirked. "Can't argue with that." Hours passed faster than she expected. As the night drew to a close, guests began leaving, and the glittering ballroom emptied slowly. Emily stepped out onto the balcony, needing a breath of fresh air. The city lights stretched endlessly before her, a sea of gold and silver. Alexander joined her quietly, standing just a step behind. "So," he said, his voice softer now, "was it worth it?" She turned to face him. "Every second," she replied honestly. "Thank you for helping me tonight." He shrugged lightly. "You helped yourself. I just played along." There was a pause, heavy but comfortable. "Still," she said, "I owe you." He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "Maybe you do," he murmured. Before either of them could say more, a flash went off. They both turned. A photographer crouched by the doorway, camera still raised. Emily's stomach dropped. "Oh no," she whispered. Alexander's expression hardened instantly. "Don't worry," he said, stepping in front of her as the photographer darted away. "I'll handle it." But deep down, Emily knew what that photo meant. The story wasn't going to end tonight. As they left the hotel, the cool night air hit her face like reality. Alexander opened the car door for her, his expression unreadable. "You'll be fine," he said quietly. "But tomorrow, things might get interesting." When she woke up the next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. She grabbed it groggily and stared at the screen. The billionaire and the unknown girl. Who is Emily Carter? Her breath caught in her throat. Her social media was flooded with mentions. Reporters were outside her apartment, and her name, her ordinary, unnoticed name, was suddenly everywhere. She pressed her hand against her heart, still trying to process what had happened. One night, one fake date, and now the whole world knew her face. As she stood by the window, watching the flashing lights of the city below, Emily realized something she hadn't before. That night had changed everything, not just how people saw her, but how she saw herself. She had faced her fears, stood tall, and walked beside a man who lived in a world she never thought she'd touch. Maybe it was all pretend, maybe it would fade in a week. But one thing was certain, Emily Carter would never again be the girl who was afraid to show up alone. The next morning's sunlight crept through Emily's blinds, but she couldn't find the strength to open her eyes. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, vibrating on the nightstand like an alarm she couldn't silence. With a groggy hand, she reached over, expecting more messages from reporters. But this time, one notification stood out. A message from Alexander. "Don't panic. I'll handle it." Her heart skipped a beat. Handle what? She grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. There it was, her face plastered across every morning talk show. "Alexander Knight's mystery date. Is she the one?" Emily groaned and buried her face in her pillow again. She could still hear the reporters outside her apartment window shouting her name. This wasn't the quiet life she was used to. Before all this, she was just a small-town artist living in Brooklyn, teaching art to kids at a community center. Now her entire life had been turned upside down by one impulsive decision at a wedding. She was trying to disappear under the blanket when the doorbell rang, a sharp, confident sound that made her stomach twist. She dragged herself to the door, muttering, "If that's another reporter, I swear." But when she opened it, her breath caught. It was him. Alexander stood there like the chaos of the world didn't touch him. Tailored suit, perfectly calm, 2 coffees in hand. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said smoothly, stepping inside as though he'd done it 100 times. "You look overwhelmed." Emily blinked, her hair a mess, her hoodie wrinkled. "That's one word for it," she muttered. He smiled faintly, handing her a coffee. "I figured you might need this." She took it, still staring. "You saw the headlines?" she asked. "Unfortunately, yes," he said. "They think we're a couple," which oddly enough made Knight Industries' stock rise 2% overnight. She nearly choked on her coffee. "You're joking." "I wish I were," he replied, half smiling. Apparently, investors love romance. Emily rubbed her temples. So what happens now? Do we release a statement? Tell them it was a misunderstanding? Alexander leaned against her counter, casual yet impossibly confident. Actually, he said, I was thinking of doing the opposite. She frowned. What do you mean? He looked at her directly. I want you to keep pretending, just for a little while. Appear with me at a few events, maybe a charity gala. Let the story fade naturally. Emily blinked, half amused, half horrified. You're serious? He nodded. Completely. It benefits both of us. The media gets their story, my company stabilizes, and in return, he paused, watching her reaction. I'll make a donation to your art foundation. Her mouth fell open. You know about that? Of course, he said simply. I make it my business to know things that matter. She folded her arms, trying to hide her surprise. And why would a billionaire care about a tiny art program in Brooklyn? He smiled slightly. Because it's not tiny if it helps people. And maybe I like supporting lost causes. She hesitated, unsure whether to be offended or grateful. So you're saying I pretend to be your girlfriend, and in exchange you fund my dream? Something like that, he said calmly. You just have to smile for the cameras. Maybe hold my hand once or twice. She laughed nervously. You really make fake dating sound like a business plan. Everything's a negotiation, Miss Carter, he said, his tone almost teasing. After a long pause, she sighed. Fine, deal. His lips curved into a slow smile. Good. I'll send a car for you tomorrow. The following week was a whirlwind. Emily found herself in places she'd only seen in magazines, luxury galas, rooftop dinners, charity events filled with flashing cameras and elegant gowns. Each time, Alexander stayed by her side, his hand at her waist, his presence reassuring and protective. Their chemistry was supposed to be rehearsed, but sometimes, when he looked at her too long or brushed her hand too gently, it didn't feel like acting anymore. She tried to convince herself it was all part of the illusion, until it didn't feel like one. One night, after a charity fundraiser, Alexander invited her up to his penthouse. The city lights glittered beneath them like a sea of gold. Emily leaned against the balcony railing, the wind playing with her hair. You know, she whispered, this was supposed to be pretend. Alexander turned, his expression unreadable. Maybe it still is, he said softly. Or maybe it stopped being pretend the moment you walked into that hotel lobby. Her heart skipped a beat. He moved closer, their faces inches apart, the city silent around them. For a fleeting moment, everything made sense. The fake smiles, the headlines, the chaos. It had all led to this. Just as their lips were about to meet, his phone buzzed sharply. He stepped back instantly, his face closing off. I have to take this, he said coldly, walking inside. Emily stood frozen, watching the door close between them. The warmth in her chest faded, replaced by confusion. When he returned, his voice was clipped and distant. I'll have my driver take you home. The ride back was silent, the air thick with words neither dared to say. That night, Emily lay awake, replaying every moment, every glance, every touch, wondering which parts were real. The next morning, she decided to bring him lunch at his office as a thank you gesture, maybe even an apology. But when she walked in, her steps faltered. A woman was already there, tall, flawless, dressed in designer white. Vanessa Hale. Emily recognized her instantly from the tabloids, Alexander's ex-fiancée. Vanessa turned, with a soft smile that didn't reach her eyes. You must be Emily, she said sweetly. I've heard so much about you. Emily forced a polite smile. Of course you have. Vanessa laughed lightly. Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts. Alexander has a habit of collecting projects. The words stung more than Emily expected. She muttered a quick goodbye and left before Alexander even saw her. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her thoughts spiraled, tangled between what she felt and what she feared. She had promised herself this was just a favor, a fake act for mutual benefit. But somewhere along the way, she had started to care. Maybe too much. She stared at her phone, waiting for his message, one that never came. The city outside her window glowed quietly, as if mocking her confusion. It was never real, she whispered to herself. It wasn't supposed to be, but her heart didn't believe her. The following morning, Emily woke to another storm. Her phone buzzed relentlessly again, but this time the message was different. Her best friend had sent a link with the words, "You need to see this." Emily tapped it, and her breath caught in her throat. On the screen, bold and impossible to ignore, was the headline, "CEO Alexander Knight engaged again, but not to who you think." And beneath it, her photo. She stared at it in disbelief, her heart racing. The world thought they were engaged. Her life had turned into a headline again. But deep down, she knew one thing for sure. This time, the story was just beginning.